Welcome fellow Rotarians and guests to our first meeting of this new Rotary year. My name is Jason Herbold, President of the Rotary Club of Downtown Sioux Falls. It is my great privilege to serve as this club's president. Our goals this year are ambitious as we tackle our mentoring initiative and strive to bring programming that is relevant to the moment we are in. And today's program is just that. We are pleased and honored to have Senator Mike Rounds and Congressman Dusty Johnson here with us today to talk candidly about what we are facing as a country at this historic moment in time. President-elect Tony Knorr will moderate for us, and I would also like to thank Vani Harari and his Think 3D team for hosting us. Over the last 4 months, we have started our meetings with the four-way test, and I'd like to do that today. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, does it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? I'd like to now turn it over to Tony Knorr, who will moderate the discussion with Senator Mike Rounds and Congressman Dusty Johnson. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Jason. We kick off the new year with Senator Rounds and Congressman Johnson. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome Rotarians and those joining us via our live stream today, July 13th, from Thinker Studios at 8th and Railroad in downtown Sioux Falls. I want to give a special thanks to Rotarian Vani Harari and his fantastic Think 3D team for hosting our conversation. For Rotarians joining us live, you're able to submit questions throughout the program. We'll do our best to get to them. That said, we have a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in with the topic that we all have a vested interest in, and that's our economy. Let's start with you're heading back, Senator Rounds and Congressman Johnson. You're heading back to DC next Monday. I know one of the items on your agenda will be stimulus 4. Let's talk to us about that. What can we expect? What tools do you see Congress using this time around?
Phase 4 will be, first of all, a chance to go back in and fix some of the problems with Phase 3. Congress never does a really good job the first time around. So we're going to try to modify some of the issues there. There will be a discussion, I believe, in the Senate, and Dusty can speak about what's going on in the House, but I think in the Senate, we're talking about, first of all, providing some liability protection for schools, universities, and businesses that want to reopen with regard to protection against class action lawsuits from COVID-19 cases. Second of all, I think we're going to be talking about some sort of an individual incentive once again. The president has indicated that he thinks it's appropriate to put out some kind of an incentive similar to what there was in Phase 3. And then we'll talk somewhat about how we handle a conversion or a continuation of the PPP program, which thousands of businesses in South Dakota participated in. Then finally, unemployment with their $600 surcharge or additional benefit on top will probably go away at the end of July. And it will be replaced with something that I think there may very well be an incentive to go back to work rather than to stay off of work. Other than that, I think we'll also have a discussion about leniency for the states with regards to perhaps more flexibility with how they spend their money that we've already allocated for them, similar to the same thing for the universities. And finally, I think we're going to try, at least I've got legislation, to try to give a forgiveness package or a forgiveness minimum amount for businesses so that everybody isn't going through this 11-page form trying to get forgiveness for a loan that they assumed was going to be forgiven if they followed the rules in the first place. I think those are some of the major issues that we'll probably be talking about.
Yeah, thank you. A lot in there, a lot to get at in a short period of time. Congressman Johnson, what's your take? Anything to add to that?
Well, I do think the senator laid it out pretty well. I mean, the big clash is going to be that the Republicans in general want to see that $600 per week reduced. I think a lot of folks, particularly business owners, understand that has been a detriment to getting people back to work. And the liability protection, that's what the Republicans really want. I think the Democrats are going to want not just more flexibility, which both Mike and I support for states and local governments, but I think they're going to want they're going to want a lot more money to state and locals. And I think that could be a bit of a source of contention. So we're going to get something done by the end of July, 'July, but those are the fault lines.
is going to get, even in the next couple of months, as we see more and more states see a rise in the number. Remember, what we've got here is a healthcare crisis, not necessarily an economic crisis. If we can fix the healthcare crisis, the economics will come back. So a lot of this is going to depend on how quickly the states are able to safely open back up and safely allow kids to go back to school. And that will, in many ways, inform us as to what we want to put in terms of the total number of dollars. I think the House originally, under Speaker Pelosi, had passed a $3 trillion HEROES Act, which nobody in the Senate even looked at, because it basically was $3 trillion and they were going to fund with federal money abortions again. And those are the types of things that just, she knew it was a statement, but it wasn't a serious statement. But what we've got right now is a question. Mitch has already said, Mitch McConnell has said he thinks $1 trillion is reasonable. The House or the Senate has said, or the White House has indicated perhaps $1 trillion is appropriate. So somewhere between that $1 trillion and the $3 trillion is probably where we're going to end up, just in terms of all units of government trying to find common ground.
Yeah, appreciate that. A lot of work to be done, a lot of ground to cover, and we'll be watching that. In what you brought up is a really great segue to what I want to talk about next, and that's that balance between public health, economics, and the politics. As states have begun reopening, we have seen varying approaches and different levels of success. Recently, like you said, we've seen an increase in cases throughout our country. It seems like we're getting mixed messages from the administration and from experts or scientists. Should we be trusting the science and the experts like Dr. Fauci? Help us understand who we should be listening to.
Okay, Dusty, you want to take that first, or shall I?
Yeah, sure. I can take a stab. I mean, first off, I would say nobody, Tony, is all knowing. I mean, I don't think it's about listening to just Firks or just Fauci and just Birx, although they're brilliant, and I think they need to be a part of the conversation. I mean, I think we do the best job when we pull together a number of experts and try to figure out a way forward that does that balancing you're talking about. In general, our country is not doing a very good job with social distancing. I think we did good to start with. But you're seeing a lot fewer masks in enclosed spaces. You're seeing a lot more people getting together and doing events in person that they don't have to do in person. And I'm not talking about 8 or 10 people. I'm talking about indoor parties with 40 people. I mean, I've been invited to those kinds of parties and obviously declined to go. I think just keeping 6 feet away from people when you're in the hardware store and wearing a mask when you're in an enclosed space. Almost nobody is doing that. And we have got to keep this economy going forward. We have got to get prepared to have the schools open in the fall, because I think those are important parts of American society. But we're not going to get to have that freedom if we don't exercise personal responsibility over the course of the next month or two. So we all need to step up our game.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think what Dusty is saying is South Dakota common sense. If you're not carrying a mask with you, you should. And when you go into stores and when you're in groups, you should have it on. There's nothing wrong with it. It should not be a political statement that you're not wearing it. I carry them with me when I'm going into a store. I have it on. If I go into any group area, I have it on. Dusty wore his when we were outside at Mount Rushmore. I wore mine sometimes, but when the breeze would come up, I'd take mine off. But look, I mean, this is a serious issue. And I'll say this, I listen to what Dr. Fauci has to say. I also recognize that Dr. Fauci is talking in medical terms. What is the way that we prevent this? His job is not to tell us how to save an economy. His job is to say, what is the best medical advice? The president and others need to do both. And so they've got to listen to what Dr. Fauci has to say. But they've also got to find a way to reopen. Yeah, if we didn't have to reopen the economy, if we could all just stay home for 6 months and stay inside and nobody had to make food and nobody had to deliver services, yeah, they'd be right. But when you've got to combine and use your expertise to do the best you can, take the common sense stuff, wear the masks, keep your social distancing, and then go about your business. But wash your hands. I mean, that's one of those things. It's the common sense stuff that your mother told you when you were in kindergarten. And so a lot of this we can do in South Dakota. And that's one of the reasons why we've been able to not totally shut down in our state, but we're not exempt from this. And if we don't use those common sense measures, and if we don't start wearing a mask when we're going into stores. And if our younger generation that loves to hit the bars and so forth, if they don't take it a little bit easier, we're going to have the same types of outbreaks here that we have in other parts of the country. And it'll slow it down in terms of a recovery. And it'll make it more difficult to recover in terms of the economic impact.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely no reason to be spiking the football at this point.
Absolutely
and we got
not.
a long ways to go with this. So thank you for that. Let's talk about the upcoming school year. As schools look to reopen, they're putting their plans together. Recently, the president came out and talked about withholding federal dollars if schools and states don't reopen this fall. Is that the right strategy?
Well, my opinion on it is that they're telling everybody they want to reopen schools. And I think the vast majority of the schools are going to reopen. They're going to try to get kids back in. I don't think it's going to be an issue. So I think what they're sending the message on it is every local school district has got to make up their own mind, but we want you to reopen.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, you're not talking about cutting off aid, state aid, or anything else. You're talking about the federal assistance that comes through. And it's one of the reasons why I would love to get rid of the U.S. Department of Education. I mean, I would love to see it go away and send the money back to the local school districts to begin with. And I think Secretary DeVos has had a lot of that same attitude on this thing here. But at this stage of the game, I think schools need to reopen. But I talked to the superintendents. They are trying really hard to do it correctly. Let's do it safely. And if they come back in and say, look, we're going to bring the younger kids in for an extended period of time, the older kids we're going to leave off for a while, we're going to do more visual stuff or at least virtual stuff, I have no problems with a hybrid approach. And I want them to keep our kids safe, but I want them to get the kids back into a learning atmosphere the best they can. But I'm going to listen to the educators on it as far as the best way to do it.
Yeah, that's great. Anything to add to that, Congressman Johnson?
Yeah, I do think we should be back in the fall full-time in person if we can safely do so. But I don't think the Fed should punish schools, school districts who decide to go a different route. And I certainly don't think we should be punishing parents and families that choose to go a different route. This is going to be a much bigger challenge than I think a lot of us realize. When you start to dissect the school day, it's amazing. I mean, it really is going to be difficult. You look at music. Well, you're not really going to have people singing in chorus. That's not a best practice with that kind of expelling the air. Well, PE is going to be a lot more difficult. When you look at the risky activities, playing with a common ball, well, that's actually pretty high up on the list. That's like a 7 on a 10-point scale. Busing is going to be more difficult. Hard to socially distance on a bus unless you take a number of seats kind of out of play. I mean, this is not going to be something. I mean, I want us to get it done safely. But I'll tell you what, if you know administrators, if you know teachers, if you know paraeducators, take an opportunity to thank them because they're putting in dozens and hundreds of hours right now trying to figure out what is the pathway forward.
Even back when I was in junior high, when it came to music class, they let me do a report instead of singing. And I think everybody was better off because of it. So
yeah, just like you said, Congressman Johnson, a lot goes into it. And the economics of it too, the parents that need to go to work during the day versus being teachers. So something we'll all keep an eye on and wanted your perspective. Let's move now to another topic that has been a point of contention the last 60 days since really May 25th. The death of George Floyd has sparked conversation around race, equality, justice reform. Those have been conversations throughout our nation. We've experienced peaceful protests, riots, calls to defund the police, a wide range of emotional responses. My question is, or our question is, what can we expect from Congress versus what needs to happen at the state and local level? And then where do we go now or from here, united moving forward to repair what has happened?
Dusty, do you want to start or you want me to?
Yeah, no, I can dive in. I mean, I think there are 3 layers of activity we need. Of course, there's a governmental response, which is where people's minds often go to. And there's a lot of legitimate work, we have to get done. And we can talk about the nuances of Tim Scott's bill if you want. Maybe I'll leave that for Mike so he's got something meaty to chat about. But Congress does need to get something done. I'm a co-sponsor of the House version of the Tim Scott bill. I think it's got a lot of necessary reforms, but it's not enough. I mean, it's not like we passed that bill and, oh, we're done. Now we get to move on to other things. We don't have equality of opportunity in this country, in housing and employment, and just being able to, rise up through society. We've got some work to do. So that's number one, governmental action. I also think there's individual action and community action that I don't want us to lose sight of. And that can be more difficult, but most of our organizations are not as diverse as they should be. And by diversity, I'm not just talking about skin color, although I don't want to make it seem as though that's unimportant, because it isn't. But we want to make sure that we've got, organizations, teams are stronger when they embrace diversity, because having a bunch of different ways to approach a problem is going to give you a better opportunity to solve it. So, yeah, you're right, Tony, to ask about governmental issues, and I'm hopeful we can get something done. But frankly, everybody who's listening, everybody who's talking here has a lot they've got to do inside themselves as well.
The Justice Act, which is what Senator Tim Scott had proposed, and I'm an original co-sponsor on it with him. It was similar to what the House had passed. About 70% of what was in the House bill was in the Justice Act that Tim Scott had proposed. There are some differences. Where there were some mandates in the House bill, most of the activity in the Senate bill was in response to trying to make things better and to appropriately fund better educational opportunities, training and monitoring at the local level. Most police officers, the vast majority of police officers, they're your next door neighbors, they're your friends, and they're being painted here with a very broad brush. What we saw in the death of George Floyd was a rogue police officer who was in charge of a situation and who had some younger people there with him, in my opinion, that didn't know how to respond to appropriately correct what they knew was an inappropriate use of force. The banning of chokeholds, unless it's to save the life of another police officer or yourself, should be in place today. Under Tim Scott's bill, lynching actually became, for the first time ever, a federal crime. But he also put money into this thing to go back in and to provide training, and then to monitor and to get the reports back out about how many times the use of force was there, how it was used, the differences between the different races and so forth. It was, I believe, a true step in the right direction, and it would have been a very good opening salvo. Our Democrat colleague says, unless you're going to look at the House bill instead of the Senate bill, we're not even going to get on this to debate it. So there really was no way for us to get on and to offer modifications, changes to the bill itself. And it suggested to a lot of us that this was probably more of an attempt to be a political discussion between now and the election than actually trying to find the first steps forward. I think Democrats may say the same thing about Republicans, but nonetheless, that is in the picture because we're in an election year. What happened to George Floyd should never happen in this country ever. It made me sick to my stomach when I saw it, and we'll do whatever we can at the federal level to influence what is going on at the local level. But there's something else that happened here, because not only did in our country we see people appropriately protest and to express their disapproval, but then you saw people start to riot, and then you saw people take the next steps of actually trying to attack the institutions of our country and the history of our country. And that's where we have a real disagreement with that segment of our population. They should not be attacking the founding fathers of this country. They should not be attacking the people that tried to save and tried to eliminate slavery. We should not be taking out the statues that support and tell the history of our country. But when it comes to, in the National Defense Authorization Act right now, we've got legislation in it to take the names of those generals of the Civil War who fought against us, to take those names off of the bases. I don't think there's anything wrong with taking those bases and renaming them. But I want to see local input, like we did here in South Dakota when we renamed locations here in South Dakota. I thought we had the right idea on that. Let's not prejudge what we want. Let's have the commission, have them come in and then make a good determination with regard to what the names should be, whether they should stay or not. I don't think they're going to stay, but let's have a commission go in and actually make a recommendation that we can vote on.
Yeah, that's great. There's so many layers to it. And like you said, we're looking for your leadership at the federal level, but we know as Rotarians and members of our community that it starts at home too. And we got to take a lead in that and continue the conversation. Rotary has had conversations around that. We want to continue to be a place where those conversations are had. You brought up monuments, statues, flags. I'm going to ask Congressman Johnson, you have been involved in drafting some legislation. We had this happen in our own state here recently. Do you want to talk about the calls for change at Mount Rushmore and what you're doing in response to that?
Yeah, and I think Mike teed it up in the right way. I mean, to me, it's always what are you celebrating with this particular statue or this particular image? I mean, with Mount Rushmore, we're not celebrating the weaknesses of Abraham Lincoln. We're trying to celebrate his role as the protector of the Union, the great emancipator, person who ended slavery. I mean, that is worthy of celebration. Now, with some of these Confederate generals, I mean, what we are honoring them for is rising up in rebellion against our country. I mean, to the extent that they had great battlefield victories, those battlefield victories were over the United States of America. And so I understand, I don't want to be cute. I understand why those statues were erected in some cases just 50 or 60 or 80 years ago. But to me, having these Confederate statues come down in an orderly process, like the senator described, is not offensive to me. I mean, I think we're celebrating the wrong things with those people. I was happy to see that Gettysburg, South Dakota took the Confederate flag off of their insignia, because again, I don't know why we would celebrate somebody to whom we went to war with or who declared war against us. So I would set those sort of images of the Confederacy, I would put those in one bucket, and I would put something like Mount Rushmore in another. Certainly those four gentlemen are not perfect. I don't have any problem discussing their imperfections. I don't have any problem having a discussion about the imperfections of our country and putting that in context as a part of the greater whole. I think we have to. And we have to be willing to have those conversations. I think we need to be intentional and thoughtful and considerate in how we engage in them. The reality, there are some prominent South Dakota political leaders who are calling for those faces to be removed. I can't see any benefit to the furtherance of racial justice by having those faces removed.
Yeah. Thank you. And you have legislation that you're moving forward in response to that. So,
yeah, and Dusty says it right. Look, the idea behind Mount Rushmore is to celebrate not just those guys up there and what they stood for. It's the message of our country. Mm-hmm. It's the call for freedom. It's the ability to defend freedom. It's to put your life on the line to defend our country. Abraham Lincoln lost his life because he believed in freeing men from slavery. And when you have that type of an attitude out there right now, you should be celebrating that. You should not be trying to take it down. And so we have to remember that it's those very important concepts that our country was built on is what makes that very special. But here's the other part. In Afghanistan, the Taliban tear down previous religious statues and monuments because they disagree with them. We're not the Taliban. And what we should be doing, if we disagree, such as if it's a statue of General Lee, put it in a museum, but hold it, because the next generations are going to want to know what it was we found offensive. They're going to want to learn from what we did. Don't tear them down. Don't deface them. Mm-hmm. Recognize that a previous generation that we are not greater than, put them up. And we may disagree with their concepts. We may really disagree with the reasons why they put them up. But if we really want the next generations to be able to understand it, they have to understand and see the work there, and then they'll understand why we didn't want it here. But we shouldn't vandalize them and deface them. We should put them away, take them down, put them in a museum, but not destroy the work of a previous generation.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective, both of you. Let's turn now to the president. How would you rate the president's performance, personal conduct, his leadership?
Well, let me start, and I'll take you off the hook on this one, Dusty, for a little bit, okay? First of all, what the president wants to do, he truly believes he's doing the right things for America. I'm convinced of that. Second of all, he has the right concepts when it comes to more freedom, fewer taxes. His economic plans are correct. He really wants an America First approach with regard to taking care of American workers. He wants to reduce the burden of actually developing and growing an economy. He wants that, and he truly believes in that. And when you talk to him, he wants that at all levels of government. He wants a conservative Supreme Court. He is pro-life. I agree with him on all of those items. Where I perhaps disagree with him is in the tenor that he takes or the tone that he takes. And we've talked to him about it. And, look, he's become the president of the United States using this approach. So to say that he is wrong on it is my opinion, but my message is I'd like him to tone it down a little bit. I'd like him to stop some of the tweeting that he does. I'd like to have him focus in many cases on the fact that you need a legal immigration system in this country. The generation just one before me, a lot of our folks, they came in. Immigrants that want to come in and work and make this country greater and to share that message, they're important to us. And so sometimes I think that gets lost in the rest of his messaging. And so I would hope that he would refocus in terms of talking about all the good things that he's been able to accomplish and the fact that he is trying to unite the country rather than point out areas in which we are in disagreement with one another. And I think if he could do that, and if he could focus with like his Rushmore speech, where he talked about a better America, better things in the future, about rebuilding the economy, about beating this pandemic, then I think he's moving in the right direction. He may very well have a second term. If he does not do that, I think he is going to be really challenged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this pandemic has created new challenges for our country, and we're working to navigate it together. And whether you agree with him or disagree with him, he's unlike any president, and we're hearing from him multiple times throughout each day. So,
I think both Dusty and I will tell you that we agree with the concepts that he's got, and we agree with the direction he wants to lead us on the vast majority of items. But there are some things on a regular basis that we disagree with him on, but we try to respectfully disagree with him, recognizing that he is the president of the United States. So if I disagree with him, I'll tell him I'm disagreeing with him. Mm-hmm. And I'll try to do it as respectfully as I can, just like I did when President Obama was president. And there were things that I would disagree with him on, but I would never do it in a derogatory term. I would do it in a respectful term, because I think that's a message the next generation has got to see as well. We may disagree on political points of view, but we should not disagree on respecting one another and allowing each other to give our points of view. And sometimes we forget that in this country.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Before we go to Congressman Johnson, one of the questions that did come from a Rotarian is around the community of Roger Stone. That was on Friday. We learned that. Your thoughts on him using his constitutional authority in that manner?
I look back at it as governor, because I had the same power that the president did in terms of the ability to commute a sentence. Number one, the president did not pardon him. He commuted the sentence. Roger Stone is still a convicted felon. The president has the statutory and constitutional authority to do exactly what he did. So it's not a matter of being wrong. It's a matter of judgment. Mm-hmm. Would I have done it? No.
Thank you. Let's turn to Congressman Johnson. Do you have anything to add to this conversation around the president? He's been in office now 3.5 years, his performance, conduct, and leadership.
Yeah, I also would not have commuted the sentence of Roger Stone. I think Mike put that well. You know, there are lots of things I agree with the president on. I mean, the approach toward economic vitality. I like holding our allies more accountable. I mean, really, the NATO allies had been free riders on the investments of the United States of America for decades. Coaching them up to that 2% spend on defense, I think, is good. It creates a safer world. I like the president holding China accountable. I don't particularly like the president's approach toward Russia. I think Russia, it works every single day to the tune of thousands of employees and millions of dollars to try to destabilize this country. And I want us to be a little more prepared for that. I want us to be a little more proactive to push back against Russian malfeasance. I do think tactically the president does things very differently than really any elected leader in South Dakota does. Most of us have a strong sense of norms and that you can't have the ends justify the means. Sometimes the president just wants to get to point H, and he'll just take the most direct path. And there are times in a republic that needs to be governed by things like division of power between the federal, state, and local level, separation of power across the branches. There are times where you do need to, in a republic, you need to go to D before you get to H. And I know that frustrates him. When he's focused, tremendous things can be accomplished. His State of the Union address back in, I suppose, January was really focused. I mean, and 80% of independents said that the president did a good or a great job with that speech. It was sort of a remarkable piece of work. And so when he's disciplined, he can really pull people together. There are many days where he does not show that discipline. And that's where I think it gets harder for us as a country to move forward.
Yeah, great. And you brought up, let's go back to it. You brought up China tariffs. Have we made progress there? I know our ag producers, last year was a challenging year. It was wet here. We had a lot of conversation around tariffs and the impact of that. Where do we stand today with?
We haven't made enough progress yet. We did get a little bit of a bounce when the Phase 1 agreement was signed, and I was there at the signing ceremony. The president made it clear at that point that he was moving in the right direction. He felt, and I thought he was too, with regard to reestablishing some fair trading agreements with China. China is not our friend. They are an adversary in all aspects. They have been stealing intellectual properties from us. Their trade deals with us that we made with them were bad for us. And they have to be redone. But you can't do business with somebody that doesn't honor their agreements or that steals from you. China has been stealing intellectual property, and they continue to do so. And in the cyber arena, they continue to steal using computer systems that can get into our systems and take information that they do not have a rightful right to have. I would say one thing with regard, it's not just China, though, it's Russia as well. And I can tell you, I know people have sometimes said it, and I think Dusty kind of alluded to it here a little bit, that, that the president has a different approach with Russia. But I chair the subcommittee on cybersecurity in the Senate. I can tell you that just recently, the Post just put out an article in which the president has now publicly, so I can talk a little bit more about it, but we taught Russia a real lesson on cybersecurity in the 2018 election cycle. And I can tell you that it was because the president allowed us to move forward with changes in public policy that allowed us offensively to take care of some issues in the cyber front. We went in and we basically shut down their cyber operations. And both the IRA and the GRU, which are two fronts for the Russian communist government, in which they were getting in and messing with our heads over here, and we basically shut them down. And they're still spinning over there. But it was because our guys were basically, they had their hands untied and we were allowed to fight. And the president allowed that. So it's not that he is just allowing or just going after China. Once he sees the path forward, he will protect American interests from any of those other countries. And I think that's a positive thing that the people in the country will learn more about, the amount of work that we've done to counter what China and Russia are doing in the cyber arena. And I'll just tell you, it is very much the truth when we talk about near peer competitors. China and Russia are both competitors of ours when it comes to defensive issues. And we cannot let our guard down. They are coming after us, not just air, land, and sea, but in cyberspace and in space. And I don't think people realize how much of our assets are actually in space and in cyberspace. They are both places that we have major contenders. And if we ever get into conflict with either of them, an open conflict, our assets in space and in cyberspace are all at risk. And we're going to have to continue to build our resources in both locations.
Yeah, well said. And a lot of complex issues right now in terms of foreign policy. When it comes to tariffs, when it comes to relationships with China and Russia, anything more to add to that, Congressman Johnson?
Yeah, we did. We were making progress. I mean, I think we wanted to get between 26 and 31 billion dollars worth of ag purchases from China this year after the trade deal was done. We're probably more at like 10 billion right now. I don't think it's that the agreement fell apart so much as COVID happened and has made it really difficult for China to hold up its end of the bargain. They have said publicly they know they have these obligations on paper to secure these purchases. They want to do so. There's a seasonal component to this as well. There are agreements or there's wording within the agreement that make it clear that, if they can get something a lot cheaper from Brazil, soybeans from Brazil, that they can do that on a seasonal basis. We're sort of exiting the Brazil purchase time period, getting more into the American soybean purchase time period. So we may see those numbers come back a little bit. China's not our friend. Mike's exactly right about that. But we do, I think, want to maintain the ability for American producers to be able to sell into those markets. I think we'd like to see a phase 2 deal with China. We'd like to see a phase 2 deal with Japan. We'd like to see an agreement with the United Kingdom, New Zealand, the EU. I mean, Bob Lighthizer and his team are making good progress in those areas. And we don't want to let this COVID, admittedly a really difficult COVID time, we don't want to let that get in the way of us completing those deals.
Yeah, absolutely right. And getting back to COVID, each time we hear word that there was a potential vaccine or potential therapeutic, the stock market goes up. We talked about the interrelation between public health and the economy. Can you provide South Dakotans, Rotarians, hope in what the work that you're doing to get us beyond this?
In the last phase that we passed, House and Senate Light, there's $10 billion that was set aside for development of vaccines and the acceleration of those vaccines. In fact, when I get done here, I'm going on a conference call for an update on what we call the Warp Speed project, which the Department of Defense is responsible for. General Perma is the acting director. And what they've done is we've picked 4 vaccines, a maximum of 4 vaccines that have the highest probability of success. And rather than waiting until they're through their clinical trials before we start to produce the vaccines that are identified as successful and safe, we've started developing those vaccines in advance so that we're producing vaccines even before they have been determined to be effective,
sure,
and safe. But these trials will go until probably the end of August, the 1st of September. And at that point, then normally, then the company would then develop in large volumes that vaccine. We've tried to accelerate that by saying of these 4 vaccines that are out there right now, it's about $2.5 billion per vaccine. We're going to start developing them now. And so as you're going through the clinical trials, we're manufacturing those vaccines, hoping to accelerate by up to 6 months. In fact, the general told us last time in front of our committee, up to even accelerating as much as a year. But so that once we've got those clinical trials completed, if they're found to be correct and safe, we'll have at least 100 million doses of those separate vaccines available. And if they're not found to be safe and effective, then we'll destroy that vaccine and the federal government will take the hit. But think about this, for $10 billion, we could be able to open up this economy perhaps 6 months sooner because we'd have that much of a head start on getting those vaccines in place. So we think it's a good bet to try and do. And right now, we've got a number of them that appear to be successful and safe. As soon as those trials are complete, and that's what the update today will discuss with us, we will have up to 100 million doses available immediately, first responders, and in a prioritized manner to get it back out into the economy and into the population. So that's where we're at today. I agree that I don't think we're going to go back to a normal until we actually get the vaccines out and get them operational. I've heard that we have possibilities of late October and early November as a possibility. I think it's reasonable to say by the end of November and the 1st of December, you might very well see that actually in our systems if everything moves according to plan right now.
Yeah, great. That is great news. We have a company here locally that's working on the therapeutic side of things, not the vaccine side of things. So we're anxiously waiting updates. I know the whole globe is. Congressman Johnson, anything from your lens as you look at the next several months as we work towards a return to normal, whatever normal might be?
Yeah, and I do think the progress we've made is unprecedented. We have a tendency to focus on the criticism of the American response. No country's response has been perfect. Certainly our country's hasn't been. But, the previous record from the widespread outbreak of a disease in this country to the widespread availability of the vaccine was 4 years. I think that was for mumps. And we're going to get this done in probably just a hair over a year. For COVID-19. That is remarkable. And that just doesn't happen by accident. I mean, in the past 5 years, congressional investment in the CDC and NIH is up more than 40%. And so it's not like we knew COVID-19 was coming, but there has been a broad bicameral, bipartisan interest in amping up that investment in recent years because we knew that pandemics and epidemics were going to be increasingly likely to happen in this increasingly interconnected world. And so it's great governmental investment and incredible private sector investment as well. And so it's really a three-pronged race. I mean, we still don't have testing where we need it, either in accuracy or in availability, although we're getting a lot closer. The therapeutics, the therapies you're talking about, we're getting closer there. That is going to be tremendously important, not only so that we can treat people who are sick, but it can be delivered as a prophylactic for frontline workers to make them less likely to get sick. And then third, of course, the vaccine we're talking about. The senator's exactly right. That is the great golden trophy. When we have widespread availability of a vaccine, that's when we're really going to be able to 100% get back.
We'll all be watching and cheering that on. We're going to continue on here. Got a couple questions, and thank you both for joining us on this week of recess. Let's talk. We talked about the balance between public health, economics, and politics. Within that is the journalism and the media that covers this crisis and this event. I'm interested in your perspective on where we stand today from media coverage. Historically, the media has provided accountability and really got to the root of issues. It seems now, depending on what station you tune into, your view of the world can be different. Your take on where we're at today and where potentially you see us moving.
Well, I think you've got to identify that, number one, media goes in cycles as well. And you still have to be able to identify. And I've always liked the idea of saying that media at its best has a front page, which is the facts and just the facts. And then on page 2, you have an opinion page, and everybody knows that it's opinion. The challenge comes when you have organizations that don't do a real good job of separating opinion from fact. And so we struggle looking to see where we find fact versus where we have opinion interspersed. Nobody's perfect, and if we were writing it, we wouldn't be perfect either. We'd still have our biases. So what I try to do is I look at a number of different sources. Some of them, I look at the individuals who I've either got a relationship with or who I've communicated with in the past to see what their approach on it is. And I tell people, once you get past the 6 o'clock news hour, look, there's a lot more opinion out there than what there is fact. Mm-hmm. And so for me, once again, look at different ones, find the ones where you know something on the subject, and then you can kind of determine which ones are the actual reporters and whether or not they're backing their information up or whether or not they've got a predetermined spin that they're going to share. And you can find it all today. Mm-hmm. But there is no perfect location to go to get your information. I just wish we had more of a page 1, and then, as Paul Harvey used to say, page 2.
Yeah, and it's a challenge too, is those that have given their life to journalism and reporting the truth get thrown in with some of the criticism, a lot of the criticism, and that criticism has come from the administration.
But let's be honest. You want both. Mm. You want the person that's writing the facts and laying out as best they can the facts that they know at that point. But everybody also wants to be entertained, and they want to be provoked by an individual who is writing an opinion piece. That's healthy. That's something that we've always had in this country. But even those folks that do the opinion page should be able to do both sides of an opinion and call that healthy as well. Today in this country, we're not finding that necessarily. We're finding where, depending upon which channel or which paper you're looking at, you're going to be one or the other. And I'm not sure that that's what most Americans would like to see.
Yeah, well, the 24-hour news cycle factors into that, and I think as South Dakotans, in a time of crisis, you're wanting to know who to listen to, and there's a lot of voices out there. Anything to add to that, Congressman Johnson, from your perspective, where we sit today in terms of journalism and media?
Yeah, we all need to do a lot better job. I mean, there is a tendency particular, and I would tell you, I think Mike said it exactly right. There are still good journalists out there trying to tell the stories. There's a lot more opinion out there in any given day, sometimes masquerading as facts than I would like. But we all need to step up. I mean, ultimately, we're getting what we pay for. Fewer and fewer and fewer of us have subscriptions to our daily newspapers. The daily newspapers really used to be the gold standard of in-depth journalism. They would often have that fact-based approach we talked about on the front page. And obviously the opinion page was a pretty separate animal. But as fewer and fewer and fewer of us are willing to pay for that news, that objective news, it's harder to find it. Americans seem to enjoy being outraged or provoked. They want to, turn into the cable news station that's going to get them all fired up and give them outrage consistent with their philosophy and their values. We don't really want to be challenged on our views. We want to be kind of supported by them. And I don't know, I have a hard time blaming MSNBC for that. I mean, if that's what their people want, do I wish they or Fox News or CNN would do a better job? Of course I do, but at some point they are going to give people what they want. So I only mention that, Tony, just to remind all of us that we do need to hear from a diverse set of news sources, but that also means we have to be willing to pay for a diverse set of news sources. I have still a hard copy subscription to more than one major newspaper that's published in this state. And if you don't, if you have the means to do so, I really wish you would.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. We see it in South Dakota, see it throughout the country. We want what we want. We want it to be right, but we don't want to pay for it. So there's a disconnect there that we're struggling through as we look to trusted sources. So thank you for that.
And Tony, one more thing I would say.
Yeah.
So many of my friends, the newspaper will say something that they don't like, and it's like only one strike. I mean, that's all it takes to have somebody walk away. We have so little patience anymore. I mean, these journalists make mistakes every single day. Oh, by the way, like I do, like even the great Tony Knorr does on a daily basis. And so I think that we also need a certain amount of patience as these smaller and smaller newsrooms work harder and harder and harder to try to get it right. We need to acknowledge the fact that, like so many of our organizations, they're going to stumble a little bit more often because we're in really difficult times.
Yeah, thank you for that. And be remiss if I did say we have a couple of Rotarians that are leading the way with South Dakota News Watch to really get out there and understand what's going on, because we just don't have the bandwidth that we've had in the past, and it's important that we continue to get the truth. So last question I have, and we'll see if we have anything come in from Rotarians. This will be a great time. If there are any questions that you have for Senator Rounds or Congressman Johnson, I want to talk about leadership. Rotary, we have a lot of leaders in our group, and as of the beginning of March, we were on a trajectory. Things were good as we knew it. Mid-March, things changed. I would just ask your perspective on the last 120 days. Who's impressed you regarding leadership at the national, state, local level? Who should our Rotarians and South Dakotans be listening to?
I think one of the most impressive things I saw was General Milley, who is basically our 4-star that is responsible for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And his message was that he had made a mistake and that he was going to correct it. And he did it at a graduation ceremony. And he did it with such class as to explaining what his thought was and the fact that he felt he had made a mistake and that he wanted to share it, that he was going to correct it now in front of everybody else. And I think for leaders to be able to say, look, we're going to do what we think is right, using the best judgment we've got. But if we've made a mistake, then we'll correct our mistake. And that doesn't mean that, as General Milley indicated, he said he thought perhaps about resigning, and he didn't. Instead, he said, you know what, I'm going to come back in on this, and I'm going to do a better job. And I appreciated that. I thought he had done the right thing at the right time, and he just laid it out. And I have seen that on more than one occasion with these men and women that wear the uniform, in terms of how they respond in times of a crisis. They're not always on the front page, but nonetheless, they are consistent and they show respect to others. And in doing so, they command respect without demanding the respect. And but I thought his message to everybody out there was one of the best examples I've seen of true leadership.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We're all looking for inspiration, leadership right now. Anything on the local, state level? You've been back now and seen the response from South Dakota.
I honestly think that your mayor here in Sioux Falls has done a good job of trying to listen to your local people and to talk about the things that need to be done right here. And I think the fact that Governor Nome has worked hard at trying to say, look, we're going to stay open, but we're going to try to get you the resources we need, but we're going to keep these decisions at the local level. That's not as easy as it looks. And so to have those types of things happening, to try to blend that thing of, I know what is right and I'm going to tell you how to do it, versus trying to share and to get everybody to kind of come to that consensus, to build that consensus, is important. So I've been impressed with what you've seen right here in the Sioux Falls region in terms of building and communicating and continuing to push forward. And once again, that's based upon the best information we've got right now. It doesn't mean that it's going to be found to be absolutely correct 6 months from now, but it's the best we've got today. And if we need to make changes, if we need to slow down or we need to accelerate, I think a good leader never says, I've made up my mind and that's it. I think you look back and you evaluate, but then you also don't catch everybody else off guard. And you try to share with other people so that they can follow your lead, knowing that you're not going to be inconsistent in the long term. But when you see an obvious flaw, you're not afraid to admit that it was your fault and that your recommendation may not have been up to speed and that it needs to be changed.
Yeah, good perspective. And you're right. We're all, whether it's in government or in business, nonprofit, we're all going to be judged in the rearview mirror.
Yep.
And we're all approaching these issues for the first time.
Yeah.
So perspective from your lens, Congressman Johnson, in terms of leaders, who's impressed you?
Yeah, other than the names that Mike mentioned, I would highlight Scott Gottlieb. He is the former head of the FDA, and he's not part of government now, so he's got a little more flexibility to kind of tell it like it is. It just doesn't have to be the company line. And what is remarkable in my mind is the extent to which he, although he's an expert, he's a technical expert, he is not a zealot. I mean, he's not beholden to just one dimension of expertise. He does as good a job of anybody, near as I can tell, in pulling together all of these different types of analyses and trying to come up with the right recommendation for how our country should proceed. It's not just educational experts. It's not just epidemiologists. It's not just economists. I think he understands sort of the importance of a 360-degree view of this thing. He's remarkable, and he has been so data-driven, and he has really been talking to America about the need to be better about some of these best practices. The masks. I mean, gang, we got to get the masks on when we're in close proximity to one another. In confined spaces. That is the way that we can maintain our progress toward a more open economy. Locally, I would tell you that I've got 3 sons in the Mitchell Public School System. Dr. Joe Graves has been remarkable. Every single week, I, as a parent, get an email and a text message outlining the types of analysis that they are doing. Not that they've made final decisions. Not that, oh, here's what we've decided to do, but here's what we're talking about. And it provides a remarkable opportunity for the community to feed in before the stew is done cooking. That communication has been key.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. There's so many examples of good leadership, and I believe most South Dakotans would agree. They're grateful to be from South Dakota right now, going through this time. Did have a question come in from a Rotarian. What are you most optimistic about as you look ahead?
Well, first of all, and I'm going to divide this up a little bit. Americans have always risen to the occasion. We've watched Americans do the same thing here in the COVID-19 crisis. Regardless of where you're at, we have found a way to work our way through this. You have people that have stood up their businesses where they have been shut down. They found a way to open them up again. Restaurants downtown have gone to carry out. They found ways to separate so that they can maintain their viability within their businesses. Manufacturers have found ways to provide separation. If you take a look at Smithfield, they've gone way out in terms of their expenditures to try to make their challenging working conditions as safe as possible for employees that are coming back to work. And these employees are coming back to work because they are essential in nature. They're creating the food that the rest of us need. And so when I look at that, there is still a desire on the part of Americans to work. There's still a desire to get things moving, to protect their families. But their industriousness is something that we can't forget about. The other piece on this is the recognition that our economy is ready to bounce back like that. And what they're waiting on are, the vaccines. They're waiting on the things to take care of the health challenge itself. When that happens, I think you're going to see an America that just says, we beat it. We're on our way again. We're going to kick butt. We're going to roll. This economy is going to grow. You're going to see kids excited to go back to school. Universities open and ready to go. And I think we will appreciate some of the things that we haven't been able to go to. And I think just going to church is one of those things where you just don't realize how much you miss it until you haven't been able to attend. And for me, that's special. And we went this weekend for the first time in weeks, and it was just so neat to do it. And I think that's going to permeate this economy, and it's going to permeate our society in terms of recognizing and appreciating what we've missed.
Yeah, great. Congressman Johnson, what gives you optimism, and what can we look to for hope as Rotarians and South Dakotans?
Well, I'm going to cheat on your question a little bit, Tony. There are three things that I think are really important to a well-functioning American society. I do think families are critically important. If you don't have strong families, it's really hard to have strong communities. I think you really need to have, I think employment is critically important. And then I think you also need a sense of togetherness, sort of this shared, where Americans were in this together. And I guess what gives me optimism is the first two. I do think COVID-19 has reminded us how critically important employment and families are. A lot of us were spending more time with our families in March, April, and May than we otherwise would have. And I think that reminded us of, the sacred connection that's there. For people who lost their jobs, I think they'll tell you how important that job is, not just economically, but psychologically. It's the third piece of the puzzle, this we're Americans together, that I think we really got to step up on. We were there in March and April and May. We were attacking this thing together. And we have got to answer that bell in a better way, because everything about COVID-19 and the reopening now seems like it's kind of turned into a partisan food fight. And so we get an A on number one, we get an A on number two, and I'm enough of an optimist to believe that between now and the end of the year, we're going to seize that opportunity to step up and set aside some of the squabbling and make sure that we tackle this as Americans. If we do that, we're going to beat this thing.
That is great, and well said. Thank you, Congressman Johnson. Thank you, Senator Rounds, for joining us today, and thank you for your service to not only our state but our country. We want to thank the team with Think 3D for hosting us today. Well done, and I want to thank Rotarians and community members for joining us in this conversation. Have a great rest of your week.